This is not a story about a killer. This animal carried no horn, no claws built for violence, no teeth shaped for anything but leaves. What we're going to find is that the largest land mammal in Earth's history wasn't an arms race winner at all. It was the only creature that solved a math problem every other mammal on the continent had already given up on. 34 million years ago, the planet broke its own climate in roughly 500,000 years, over 100 times faster than the whole of written human history, and turned a closed rainforest into a starving woodland. Every mouth at ground level was already full. The only unclaimed food left on the entire continent was 9 meters straight up. This is the story of the body that was built out of pure necessity to go get it.
Here is the systemic shock that makes this animal possible. Roughly 34 million years ago, atmospheric carbon dioxide dropped below the threshold Central Asia's dense, closed canopy forests needed to survive. Antarctica began locking ocean water into permanent ice, a process that once started could not be reversed on any timescale that mattered to the animals living through it. Within about 500,000 years, the unbroken canopy that had stood for tens of millions of years broke apart into scattered tree stands, dry grass, and open woodland. Paleontologists call the resulting collapse the Grande Coupure, the Great Break. Entire lineages of small, forest-bound mammals vanished from Europe and Asia within a few 100,000 years, a turnover rate that, translated into human terms, would mean every songbird species on the continent disappearing within 3 generations. Gone. What survived was a landscape with a strange economic imbalance. At ground level, dozens of small and mid-sized herbivores were already fighting over the same low shrubs. 3 meters up, roughly 10 feet, that competition simply stopped because nothing had the body required to reach it. An entire floor of unclaimed food hung in the air above a starving continent, and for millions of years, nobody could afford to go get it. A forest didn't just thin out. It left an entire floor of food unclaimed above everyone's head. But how do you actually build an animal to reach 9 meters, roughly 30 feet, into a canopy without the math killing it first? Growing larger to reach unclaimed food sounds simple until you total the cost. A modern rhinoceros already carries a calf for about 16 months, nearly twice a human pregnancy. And a single bad year, a drought or hard winter, doesn't get corrected for a generation. In almost every prehistoric ecosystem on record, that math kills the giant before it ever gets big enough to matter.
Here's the physical problem nobody could avoid. An animal that doubles in linear size becomes roughly 8 times heavier. But the cross-sectional area of its leg bones, the part actually resisting collapse, only increases about 4-fold. Scale that mismatch up far enough, and a leg built like a horse's simply shatters under its own owner. The most dangerous engineering problem this animal ever faced wasn't a predator. It was standing up. The solution borrowed less from a sprinter than from a bridge. Its limbs became pillars, not springs. Vertical columns of compressed wrist and ankle bone, transmitting weight straight down into the earth, the same way a pier transmits the load of a deck above it. Biomechanists call this a Graviportal stance. Elephants use the identical solution today, the only living animals that face this exact design problem at any comparable scale.
The cost was total. Pillars don't store elastic energy the way a cheetah's limbs do. This animal, in all likelihood, never ran in any sense a person watching this would recognize. Standing without collapsing was the triumph. Outrunning anything was never a problem this skeleton was built to solve. Which means whatever protection this animal had, agility could not be it.
There's a genuine debate among paleontologists over a detail that should, on paper, be simple to settle: how much this animal actually weighed. Published estimates range from roughly 11,000 kilograms, about 24,000 pounds, or 5 African bull elephants, up to 20,000 kilograms, around 44,000 pounds, nearly double. Scaling from limb bone circumference produces the lower figure. Scaling from overall body proportions produces the higher one.
Both methods are mathematically defensible, and neither has a living animal at this mass to calibrate against. The honest answer is that this was almost certainly the heaviest land mammal in history, and a century later, nobody can put a single number on it. The skull adds its own unresolved question. Its nasal opening sits unusually far back, retracted toward the eyes rather than at the snout tip, an architecture that in living animals belongs to species with a mobile, muscular upper lip, the same tool a black rhinoceros uses today, just scaled up dramatically. Whether that lip extended into anything resembling a true trunk remains genuinely unresolved. The soft tissue never fossilized, and the elephant-like trunk given to it in century-old reconstructions has mostly been walked back. The heaviest land mammal that ever lived still doesn't have an agreed-upon weight.
At full adult size, predation stopped being an everyday threat. No predator in this ecosystem was built to tackle a healthy adult of this mass. The agility its legs sacrificed, its scale simply made irrelevant. But that raises the real question of this act. What happened to everything living underneath it? At lower elevations, the woodland stayed crowded. Early true rhinoceroses, other hornless rhino relatives, and a handful of odd browsing specialists were all competing for the same 3 meters of intact vegetation the Grande Coupure had left behind. None of them competed with this animal directly for food. There was no overlap to fight over, but its presence still rewrote what grew beneath it.
Modern elephants are documented doing exactly this: pushing over trees, stripping bark, trampling saplings, converting closed woodland into open grassland over time, acting less like residents of an ecosystem than its architects. A 15,000 kilogram, roughly 33,000 pounds, about 10 mid-sized cars stacked into one body, animal moving through standing timber at even a slow walk does not pass through it without consequence. There's no direct behavioral record for this species, but by mechanical necessity alone, it plausibly functioned the same way, clearing space for the grasses a closed canopy would otherwise have shaded into extinction. For decades, popular reconstructions gave this animal a single curved horn on its nose, modeled directly on a modern rhinoceros, because the family resemblance seemed obvious. That's not what the fossil record shows.
Hyracodontidea, the specific family this animal belongs to, never evolved a horn at all. The horn belongs to an entirely different rhino lineage. What actually stood in that clearing was a long, prehensile-lipped face mounted on elephant-scale pillar legs. Not a horned giant, but something closer to a hornless rhinoceros that had, evolutionarily speaking, decided to become a giraffe instead. And this was never a local success story. Fossils belonging to this genus, Paraceratherium, turn up from Turkey in the west to Mongolia and China in the east, a span of roughly 7,000 kilometers, about 4,300 miles, or nearly twice the width of the continental United States. For something like 10 million years, 10 million times longer than the whole of written human history, a body plan invented to solve one local food shortage ended up governing an entire continent's worth of woodland. One unclaimed resource turned a single lineage into a continental empire.
Every adaptation in this story bought time. None of them paid the bill forever. And the bill, when it finally arrived in calories. Think about what that means for a moment. An animal this successful didn't die from a single catastrophe. It died from arithmetic. Scale a modern elephant's metabolic needs up to a 15,000 kilogram body using standard mammalian scaling laws, and the result needed well over 100,000 kilocalories a day just to keep its organs running and its muscles moving before it grew, reproduced, or did anything but exist. Set against a human's roughly 2,000 kilocalorie daily requirement, that's the energetic equivalent of one animal eating what 50 to 100 people eat every single day for decades. That number was survivable as long as the canopy stayed connected across a wide enough range. Then came a fatal triangle. First, the planet kept cooling and drying through the late Oligocene into the early Miocene, roughly 23 million years ago, and forest patches that had once formed a continuous woodland began fragmenting into isolated stands, separated by expanding grassland. Grassland this feeding apparatus was never built to exploit. Second, a 100,000 kilocalorie daily requirement does not shrink because the habitat did. Third, early elephant relatives arrived in Eurasia for the first time, migrating in after tectonic shifts connected Africa to the continent, bringing trunks, social herds, and a body plan built for the exact same highbrows niche. Any one of these three pressures alone is survivable. All three together are not. A population needing well over 100,000 kilocalories per individual per day, spread across a shrinking, fragmented forest, competing against a newly arrived rival with a more flexible feeding tool, that population doesn't require a single extinction event. It only needs the available calories per square kilometer to drop below what each animal requires to survive and reproduce for long enough. By roughly 23 million years ago, across most of its former range, they had. This animal didn't lose a fight. It lost an equation it could no longer solve. Picture an alternate Asia, where the climate stabilized a few million years earlier. The forest patches stayed connected, and this lineage held on. The niche it occupied, tall browser, canopy specialist, ecosystem engineer clearing space for grassland, would already have been filled. There would have been no equivalent opening for the elephant relatives moving in from Africa to expand into. The animal people picture today when someone says the biggest land animal that ever lived might not be an elephant at all. It might be a hornless, long-necked rhinoceros almost nobody outside paleontology has heard of, simply because it never lost the job to begin with. It did lose the job. And here's what that means for you. Every documentary you've ever watched about elephants reshaping the African savanna, pushing over trees, opening grassland, acting as the keystone species an entire ecosystem depends on, is describing a strategy this animal ran first, 25 million years earlier, on a different continent, at an even larger scale. The elephant didn't invent the giant herbivore as architect role. It inherited a vacancy. There's a temptation, looking at an animal this large, to treat its size as the end of the story, proof that evolution had hit some kind of ceiling, a final form. The honest lesson runs the opposite direction. Gigantism isn't a destination. It's a loan against a very specific environmental budget, and the terms of that loan are fixed the moment the body commits to the scale. Legs built to never collapse cannot be quickly rebuilt into legs built to run. Becoming the largest land mammal in history was never the achievement. Affording it was. Nothing exhales in this clearing anymore. Not running, not hiding, not present at all. You couldn't see it at the start of this story either, but for a different reason now. For roughly 10 million years, something stood in clearings exactly like this one,
reaching for leaves 9 meters above the ground that nobody else on the continent could touch, solving a problem no animal before or since has solved quite the same way. Then, the budget that made it possible quietly changed, and the largest land mammal in Earth's history ran out of calories before it ran out of canopy. The leaves it once ate still grow at the same height. Nothing has reached them since.